You're listening to the November 6, 2015 edition of the Cybercrime and Business Podcast, the weekly podcast that's focused exclusively on how the world of cybercrime is impacting business. On today's episode, we have an interview with Brett Stone Gross. He's the senior security researcher at Dell SecureWorks Counter Threat Unit. They recently collaborated with various agencies in an effort to take over the Dridex banking Trojan. And we talk about that operation, banking Trojans, and new developments facing the financial sector. This podcast is brought to you by Surfwatch Labs. Hello, everybody out there. I am Jeff Peters, Surfwatch Labs editor, and I'm here with Matt Leifus, Surfwatch Labs writer. That interview with Brett Stone Gross will be coming up in a little bit, but first, as always, we're going to dive right into the latest news and recap some of the top trending cybercrime events, advisories, and legal actions from the past week.
Yeah, let's go ahead and do the usual, get into the top trending industry targets for the week. Coming in at number 3, a lot of you probably heard about this. There's actually been a lot of news. We're going to talk about the Ku Klux Klan. As part of the anonymous operation, which was dubbed Op KKK, the hacktivist group released information on more than 500 KKK members yesterday. Another hacktivist dubbed Amped Attacks, and this is kind of what really stood out to me because I was a little confused because I thought they, Anonymous had like a release date. Well, this Amped Attacks hacktivist, he released a list of U.S. senators and mayors. There was like 10 or so total that were allegedly tied to the KKK. Anonymous came out and said that they had nothing to do with releasing that data. And it was later confirmed by this Amped Attacks that he was acting alone and had nothing to do with it. So a little hazy on whether that information is accurate. But if you guys want to go online and check it out, Anonymous did release about 500 members of KKK members. Coming in at number 2, we had British Gas. About 2,200 customers of the company had their email addresses and British Gas account passwords posted online. The company, however, said in a statement that their systems were not breached and the information was obtained from another source. The company said no bank account or payment card info was accessed or posted up. And coming in at number 1, this is one of those breaches that just kind of is lingering on, and we keep talking about it. We have TalkTalk Telecom Group. The British telecom company was the victim of a cyber attack about 2 weeks ago. This morning, the company announced that 156,959, how's that for being accurate, customers had their information compromised, which was down from previous estimates, which have been upwards, over 1 million. TalkTalk continues to stay in the headlines due to arrests occurring from the breach. So far, 4 people have been arrested for allegedly violating UK's Computer Misuse Act involving this TalkTalk breach. 3 of the people arrested were teenagers, and 1 of them was a 20-year-old. So guaranteed we'll hear more about that. Jeff and I are actually going to talk about that in a little bit. But first, just a quick mention. We're going to go back in time here and talk about the United States Office of Personnel Management. A lot of you remember that there was a huge government breach. Tens of millions of people were affected. A U.S. government official recently just came out and said that fewer than a quarter of the 21 million federal workers affected by the breach have been officially told that their personal information was compromised. And obviously, this is 6 months after the breach was detected. Jeff, I'm sure that they heard about it in news, but they still have yet to get any type of notification saying, hey, some of your stuff's probably out there.
6 months is a pretty long time to notify people. I mean, I know it takes a little bit of time, but sometimes you get the government criticizing private companies for taking a long time. And now here we are, OPM, taking 6 months, and still 3 out of 4 people haven't even been notified.
They're probably just, government's probably just hoping they go on Facebook and read about it or something, get their daily social media information. But for today's topic, as I promised, we are going to talk about the TalkTalk Telecommunications breach.
I woke up this morning and I seen that they released those new numbers, which you just went over. And so I guess TalkTalk's been criticized quite a bit over the past couple of weeks about their handling of the breach and about their security in general. This is actually the 3rd recent data breach from the company. There was one in December 2014. Then there was one in February 2015. And then Matt and I talked about this on the podcast a couple months ago. There was the Carphone warehouse breach, which affected some TalkTalk mobile customers. Basically, this would be the fourth way that some of these customers would be affected. So some of the customers are obviously a little upset about TalkTalk and their security. I was reading an article by Peter Sayer from IDG News Service, and he said that while the theft of customers' personal data from the company is a sign that all is not quite right with the company's online security, the most shocking thing is not the number of customers affected, but the way the matter has been handled. Yeah, so the company found out about this breach on Wednesday, October 21st, and then on Friday, Chief Executive Dito Harding was giving interviews, and the company actually emailed all 4 million of its customers, so that kind of led, I wouldn't say to a panic, but to a little, everyone was thinking it's going to be this massive breach, millions of customers, and it turns out it's only about 156,000, which is still significant, but not quite the level that, everyone was kind of expecting. So people have been criticizing them for that.
Yeah, and another thing, and this is just kind of funny, I suppose. After TalkTalk came out, and said, hey, these 4 million customers, were affected, and like Jeff said, that wasn't the case. Number one, their shares fell 10% following the news, which is a pretty big drop-off. Another thing, with this, TalkTalk confused those reporting on the breach by first saying that the customer's data may have been compromised via a DDoS attack, which anyone out there distributed denial of service, that's a completely different thing. We've talked before that criminals might use a DDoS attack as like a smoke screen to do another type of attack, but you're not going to lose anything strictly from a DDoS attack. And then the company followed up in saying that they were the victims of a sequential attack, and what they were really the victim of was a SQL injection attack and not a second attack. So one could assume that what really happened, like I said, a DDoS attack was used as a smokescreen, and a SQL or SQL injection was the attack vector for the data breach. So it was all probably part of the same attack, just two different methods were used to accomplish the goal.
Yeah, and like I said this morning, they updated the numbers, and there's a few different things for people to be aware of if you're a TalkTalk customer. The total number of customers affected is around 157,000. But within those, there's other numbers. 15,600 had bank account numbers and sort codes stolen. And then there was also 28,000, I believe, payment card numbers stolen, although TalkTalk's downplaying that and saying that they can't be used for fraud, those stolen numbers. You can kind of look at it two ways. TalkTalk, in their announcement this morning, they said that the scale of the attack was much smaller than initially suspected, and now they're confirming it's only 4% of the total customers that have had any sensitive personal information put at risk. And then they also said that it was a difficult decision to notify all our customers of the risk before they could establish the real extent of any data loss. But, quote, we believe we had a responsibility to warn customers ahead of having the clarity we are finally able to give today. Kind of a strangely worded quote, I think.
A little bit, yeah.
But, so I guess good on them for trying to be upfront. I mean, my personal thought immediately goes to, well, they've been criticized constantly for data security over the past year. So something happens, they immediately want to be upfront about it and put it out there and alert the media, warn our 4 million customers. And then it turns out, oh, it's not really quite so big. But, you don't want to criticize the company for trying to be proactive about telling people.
There's an ugly side to this, too. There's the business side of everything. Clearly, on that note, they don't want all of this bad press out there. Maybe from that, they could have done a little bit more research, before that. I mean, you're right. Kudos to them for coming out. But
on the other hand, I read a few articles this morning from different investors saying, now is the time to invest in TalkTalk because it kind of dipped a little bit. So they're saying jump on the TalkTalk bandwagon. Some people are saying that. I mean, don't take that as advice. I know nothing about the stock market.
Now there's a conspiracy theory. All right. So this is what happened. No, I'm just kidding, guys. Maybe we'll have to talk about that sometimes at some point. Not that that's what happened here, but how cyber attacks can actually influence the stock market.
Well, I wrote an article about that actually a while ago, and that was one of the big future wave was going to be manipulating the stock market. So if the shares are going to fall, there's different things you can do to capitalize on that and try to make some money. Potentially a lot more money than you're going to be able to make otherwise. That's what some of the people I've talked to have said. So, yeah, that is a concern. Obviously, that probably didn't happen here, but who knows?
Yeah, and we are just going out there. We're not saying that's what happened here. It's just interesting to speculate, but that we're not saying that's what happened.
Yeah, and then just following up real quick on some other items related to TalkTalk. The Culture, Media and Sport Committee of the British Parliament said that in light of these multiple incidents, it has, quote, decided to hold an inquiry into the circumstances surrounding the TalkTalk data breach and the wider implications for telecoms and internet service providers. So there's a little bit of government action going on around there. And then I believe a few people were arrested regarding this too, right, Matt?
Yeah, there were 4, actually. 3 of them were teenagers, and then there was a 20-year-old. All of them, the UK has something called the Computer Misuse Act, and that's what they were charged with, all in connection to the TalkTalk breach. No names have been released. Possibly where they might have hailed from exactly, but shame on me, I didn't find that information. So, sorry, guys. But 4 people have been arrested.
So moving on from the TalkTalk breach, that was obviously the big story over the past week or so. But there was quite a few different cyber advisories out there that we saw throughout the week. I will update you guys on a few of those. One of the interesting ones is there's a new variant of this Chimera ransomware that's been discovered. And what's interesting about this is it combines scareware tactics with the usual encryption operations that you get with ransomware. And the actors behind this are threatening to post the personal files online from their targeted victims. So not only are you losing your items, now they're threatening, we're going to post pictures or other sensitive documents for everyone to see. And I think that campaign was first spotted in Germany.
What do people keep on their computers? That's a valid tactic. I mean, if you're talking like, personal information, like, bank account, whatever else, but I mean, what do people keep on their computers? I hear about this a lot. Maybe I'm too innocent. I don't know.
Previously on people's phones, all the nude photographs and the celebrity scandals and all that stuff. So, I mean, who knows?
I suppose.
Who knows what people do in their own little private world? So
I think I need to get my feet wet and actually participate in the world or something, because I like some of the stuff I hear about it. I'm just like, what? Why is that a big deal? Who cares? But
well, no, actually, the researchers who spotted this, they said that they hadn't seen any actual evidence of the attackers actually posting the file. So maybe you're right. There's really no threat there. I think it's just kind of another little way to nudge people into paying. Instead of not only are you going to lose your information, but we're going to embarrass you somehow with this or that. So maybe that'll be a trend that we see, but we haven't seen it yet.
Well, what a bunch of jerks. The next advisory that we found had to do with pay-at-the-pump skimming attacks, and experts are saying that they're on the rise. Experts are warning of increased pay-at-the-pump skimming attacks to occur before the companies turn to EMV payment options. According to Aviva Latan, a financial fraud expert at Gartner, quote, unattended and especially older self-service gas pumps are and have always been a very attractive target for criminals. And they will become increasingly attractive as these will be some of the last payment acceptance devices to be upgraded to EMV in the U.S. And just so everyone's aware out there, the EMV shift for like retail stores that's already come and gone. But the liability shift deadline for gas pumps is actually in 2017. So experts are warning before that date comes, there's going to be an increase of pay-at-the-pump skimming attacks.
And then we have another Android advisory. There's always these mobile advisories out there. There's a wormhole vulnerability that's leaving 100 million Android users at risk. As usual, a lot of these vulnerabilities are related to China. Same with this one. A vulnerability has been found in the MoPlus software development kit that Chinese web services company Baidu created for developers. So this kit has a functionality that can be exploited and used to gain access to a mobile user's device. The exploit is already being used on more than 14,000 Android apps, with 4,000 of them developed by Baidu, and that potentially was affecting 100 million Android users. And then I also saw another interesting piece. There was a little confusion out there about this vulnerability, and Trend Micro had a blog post on it earlier in the week. They said that this MoPlus SDK software development kit has a backdoor functionality that isn't really necessarily tied to this wormhole vulnerability. So they say that this SDK has backdoor routines such as pushing phishing pages, inserting arbitrary contacts, sending fake SMS messages, uploading local files to remote servers, and installing Android applications without user authorization. So they were saying it's a little more than just this vulnerability that was initially reported on, and Baidu replied to Trend Micro and said that they have went ahead and fixed the vulnerabilities that Trend Micro pointed out.
Keeping on that theme of Android, another advisory that came out, researchers from Google's Project Zero security team found 11 zero-day bugs in the new Samsung Galaxy S6 Edge. We'll have to talk to Adam. Adam Meyer has been on the show before, and he's pro Android. We talk about Apple, and how Apple's so popular, and he actually, maybe I shouldn't say what he actually says about that, but he's pro Android, so I'm going to share this with him. So the researchers from the Google Project Zero team found these 11 zero-day bugs on the new Samsung Galaxy S6 Edge. They spent about a week researching the device, but what was most concerning about this, now some of these zero days, they're very technical, and there's not a patch out for it, but there's only certain people that can really exploit it. But they said that 3 of the bugs found were described by the team as, quote, trivial to exploit. Now, having said that, a recent article from the BBC has reported that most of these issues were fixed after Google notified Samsung, but some of the vulnerabilities have yet to be addressed. So if you do have this phone, like I said, just be wary that there are still some lingering issues with it.
And then on the Apple side of things, in the past we talked about this Xcode Ghost malware that was infecting some of the iOS applications in China. Researchers at Symantec, and I believe FireEye posted a blog about this too, they discovered a new variant of the Xcode Ghost malware that's still affecting official iOS applications in China. This variant is found in unofficial versions of Xcode 7, so it's the same issue where, they're taking these unofficial versions of the Apple development software and, making them malicious. But basically this Xcode 7 allows developers to create applications for iOS 9, the latest version of iOS software. So potentially, if developers are using this malicious Xcode, they could have the same issue that they were having before with malicious apps being uploaded to the Chinese Apple Store. So those were some of the main advisories. And then Surfwatch Labs also put out a few different alerts to our customers over the past week.
There were actually 2 this week, and I'll just go through both of them quick, guys. The first one, security researchers have discovered a Chinese company called Tao McKay. What do you think?
I think that's pretty good. That was a good effort.
McKay?
Good effort.
Okay. Security researchers have discovered a Chinese company called what I am going to say Tao McKay. If someone wants to, comment and say I got that completely wrong, that's fine. I won't be offended.
Feel free to email in your complaints.
Absolutely. They have been distributing a malicious software development kit, or SDK, that is meant to help developers add in-app purchasing to their applications. Once a user downloads an app built with this particular development kit, the malware steals messages from the device and sends them to Tao McKay, or however you're actually supposed to say that. And the second one was the MySQL or SQL server malware created to conduct DDoS attacks. Security researchers discovered malware specifically created to infiltrate MySQL servers and order them to conduct distributed denial of service attacks. The malicious malware was injected to servers via a user-defined function, or UDF. So far, the majority of infected servers reside in India, China, Brazil, and the Netherlands. These infected servers were specifically targeting China IP addresses with a U.S. hosting provider.
So moving on to some of the legal developments, we'll try to fill you guys on a couple of those real quick. One of the biggest ones was a settlement with Cox Communications. The broadband communications company has agreed to pay $595,000 and submit to 7 years of computer security compliance monitoring by the FCC. This stood out to me. I saw this morning because the FCC in their press release, they said that today's action represents the FCC's first privacy and data security enforcement action with a cable operator. So just to rewind and fill you guys in on what happened with this breach, the FCC's Enforcement Bureau's investigation found that Cox Communications' electronic data systems were breached in August 2014 by a hacker using the alias Evil Jordy, part of everyone's favorite hacker collective, the Lizard Squad.
Yay.
So Evil Jordy pretended to be from Cox's information technology department and convinced both a Cox customer service representative and a Cox contractor to enter their account IDs and passwords into a fake website to phish those credentials. And then he used those credentials to gain unauthorized access to Cox customers' personally identifiable information, which included things like name, addresses, email addresses, secret questions, PINs, and in some cases, partial social security and driver's license numbers. In addition, the company's telephone customers had their customer proprietary network information stolen.
And this is one of the things that the FCC said. So, quote, consumers of cable and satellite services are entitled to have their personal information protected. The Communications Act already imposes heightened obligations on cable and satellite operators to protect the personally identifiable information of their subscribers, and to take such actions as are necessary to prevent unauthorized access to this information. Inadequate security of subscribers' personal information can result in real-world consequences for those customers who are put at risk of financial and digital identity theft.
This really was interesting just because we've seen a lot of first kind of on the legal front, a lot of, first company of this type or that type getting fined, and this was the first cable operator to reach a settlement with the FCC. And the reasoning for the settlement with Cox Communications, they said that the company must take, quote, every reasonable precaution to protect their customers' data. And in addition, the law requires carriers to promptly disclose breaches of customer proprietary network information via their reporting portal within 7 days. And Cox did not do that within 7 days. So a couple reasons there why they ended up getting fined.
And to go back to exactly how that happened, essentially, and we talk about this quite a bit, and it's one of the things that I always stick to, talking about risks for companies concerning cybersecurity. This is another situation where an employee was tricked and entered information to a website, and it led to a compromise. And I'm sure this guy, this evil Geordie, was very convincing and everything, but that can't happen, and it poses such a huge risk for companies. Just this little inside stuff. You trick one person into divulging this information, and look what happens. And that just can't happen anymore. People need to be aware of what's going on. They need to question things. They can't just oh, sure, yeah, this looks great. Here's the information. Go to town. You can't do that.
Yeah, well, not to sound like defeatist about it, but a lot of studies have shown that, even the best trained companies in terms of security and social engineering, they still is always something that's going to get through, some little thing here or there. Obviously, handing over credentials is kind of a big thing. Obviously, you do want to limit it as much as possible, but you also want to have, just something as simple as having two-factor authentication, although obviously they could hand that over in a social engineering attack as well, but that way, if they do lose their credentials, it's going to take something else to log in as well, to make it a little more difficult on these groups like Lizard Squad to get in there.
Moving on with legal, we have here's the headline: Morrison's being sued by employees over breach. I believe Morrison's is a UK grocery store. In July, Andrew Skelton, who's a senior employee at Morrison's, received a sentence of 8 years for posting the details of nearly 100,000 members of their staff online. Now Morrison's is being sued over that breach. More than 2,000 Morrison staff are now pursuing a group litigation order against the supermarket group following a hearing in London's High Court. The case has been given a 4-month waited period for other Morrison staff to join the group claim. So that sounds kind of ugly.
Yeah, then moving on to arrests, there was a Europe-wide police crackdown on Droid spyware. An unconfirmed number of people were recently arrested in this crackdown. One confirmed arrest reported by the BBC was a 28-year-old man from Carlisle. The people arrested in this operation were all charged with violating the Computer Misuse Act. There was also some other arrests this week too, right, Matt? I believe you have one of them for the funny story of the week.
Yes, I do, Jeff. Zachary Landis of Pennsylvania was sentenced to 2 to 4 years in prison for charges related to hacking. What did Mr. Landis do, you might ask? Well, it all started with Craigslist. The free, you post anything you want. Sometimes you get Craigslist killers, and I'm not going to go there. Craigslist scares me anyway. Landis put out an ad on Craigslist looking for a hacker. Police were notified about the ad. And eventually an undercover police detective posed as an interested party to the ad. It didn't take long for police to discover who Landis was, his personal email, or his IP address. Now, what was the ad? Landis posted an ad looking for a hacker to wipe out all of his fines that he had occurred in Pennsylvania stemming from a lawsuit in 2008 where he was convicted of assault. He owed the court $16,000 and $9,000 to the victim of the assault case. Landis was eventually arrested and charged with criminal solicitation to commit unlawful use of a computer, computer theft, computer trespass, and tampering with public records. $25,000 is a lot of money, but I'll tell you, I would much rather pay $25,000 and spend one frickin' day in jail. So, I mean, I hope that was worth it. But posted something like that on Craigslist, and then number two, to be like, oh, wipe out my fines. I mean, get more inventive, man.
It's just funny that with everyone talking about the NSA and government surveillance and everything, there's still bozos out there that'll just post a Craigslist ad with their real email and their name and all this stuff. And just for illegal stuff. Like, obviously...
I'm Zachary Landis from Pennsylvania. Here's my email. Send all correspondence here. Like, what?
All right, now coming up, we have our interview with Brett Stone-Gross, the senior security researcher at Dell SecureWorks Counter Threat Unit. And we talk about various banking Trojans and what is happening in the financial sector. In October, you wrote about the takeover of the Dridex banking Trojan, which authorities say has resulted in $30 million in losses in the UK and $10 million in the US. So just wondering if you could fill our listeners in a little bit about what that Trojan is and if there was anything unique about it.
Yeah, sure. So Dridex has many of the features that are characteristic of a lot of the modern banking Trojans, such as the ability to steal credentials and manipulate content viewed in a web browser through web injects. And the main purpose they really use it for is committing wire and ACH fraud. What sets Dridex apart is really its design. They've built a hybrid peer-to-peer network where they use infected computers that act as a massive proxy network to forward traffic upstream through a layer of compromised servers to the backend infrastructure. So what that does is it makes it more difficult for security researchers and law enforcement to identify the location of the criminal servers. But the way they've designed it, the peer-to-peer network is not nearly as resilient as other true peer-to-peer botnets like Game Over Zeus, because it's non-self-organizing and it cannot maintain itself without the backend service periodically pushing out new peer lists.
It seems like every, couple months we read about one of these takedowns in the news and, it gets a lot of headlines. But I'm just kind of wondering what goes into a takedown effort like the ones with Dridex. I don't know if you can maybe elaborate on sort of what goes on behind the scenes. Is it a lot of work that's involved in combating these cybercriminal groups?
Yeah, there's a tremendous amount of effort that goes into these coordinated takedown efforts between private industry and law enforcement. At a high level, there's really two main components. The first being accurate attribution to identify those responsible for the attack. And the second part would be malware reverse engineering to understand how the malware works and how to design an attack that can be leveraged to take down or take over the botnet. And then once both of those components are in place, the operations involve legal action coordinated with a technical operation to dismantle the botnet.
And I've read a few articles about the takedown, and they've some of them have been sort of implying that Dridex kind of making its way back and it's impacting organizations again. Just wondering your thoughts on that. Is that typically what happens? It's kind of like a game of whack-a-mole. You beat one down and then it pops back up again, or just any thoughts in general on that?
The short answer is it depends. There's humans behind all of these attacks. So if you're able to arrest the individuals who are behind these botnets, there's a much lower chance of these botnets coming back. Of course, without arresting or having public indictments or other legal action against those individuals responsible for these operations, there's definitely a good chance that a lot of these threats will come back at some point after one of these operations.
Yeah, I wanted to get your thoughts just on, how these different Trojans and botnets are affecting the financial sector in general, because I think it was earlier this year in April, you guys, Dell SecureWorks, you wrote about a few other takedowns. I think the most famous one was probably Game Over Zeus, the one that a lot of people have heard of. And you wrote that it temporarily reduced the botnet activity. And now we have this other takedown in Dridex again. So just wondering your thoughts on where we are today threat-wise, because it seems like a lot of the big ones have been at least impacted a little bit. So is the threat more spread out, or is there any particular threats to be concerned about?
Yeah, so Game Over Zeus was a very unique botnet in the way they constructed it and the way it was operated. So it's common nowadays to see a lot of botnets have this affiliate model. But Game Over Zeus had by far one of the largest affiliate businesses where they had hundreds of thousands of infected computers that were active each day, and they would rent out a portion of that botnet to different affiliates. And they had more than a dozen different affiliates. And once that botnet was taken down, the affiliates had to come up with either a new botnet on their own or seek help from others who develop malware to look into how to commit their wire and ACH fraud through other means. And Dridex and Dire are two of those botnets that filled in some of the void for Game Over Zeus, but they've never been quite as successful as Game Over Zeus. Dridex is nowhere near the level of sophistication as Game Over Zeus, and same with Dire. And what we saw is kind of a mad scramble after the Game Over Zeus operation to come up with something that they could still use to carry out fraud. And looking at the initial versions of Dridex and Dire, they were quite simplistic, and there's no question they were in a rush to get something out the door. And a lot of these guys probably view these operations that they run as a business, and every time one of their botnets gets taken down, they lose money. So it's important for them to have these botnets operational and online. And what they really enjoyed with Game Over Zeus was stability. So they could focus on what they were good at, and that was mainly wire fraud. And the Game Over Zeus guys could focus on maintaining and developing a resilient botnet for them.
Yeah, just curious if, off the top of your head, like what are the top botnets or threats that are impacting banks at the moment?
So the top are Dire, Dridex, Timba, ReactorBot, Gozi NeverQuest, which is also known as Votrack.
It seems to me like if I was a cyber criminal, I'd want to be not quite so successful, because it seems like once you get a botnet and they get so successful, then you get these, you get the attention of law enforcement and, companies like yours. Do you get the sense that some cyber criminals kind of try to do that to stay under the radar and not grow so big?
Yeah, absolutely. We've seen various groups try to keep a low profile. They don't want to grow to the size of hundreds of thousands of computers, because at that point they get a lot of attention from researchers and law enforcement. And a lot of them actually maintain a specific size or don't want to exceed a certain threshold because they do want to maintain a low profile.
Yeah, and one of the Trojans that you mentioned was the Timba Trojan. I know that you guys had some new news that's coming out this week about that Trojan. Just wondering if you could fill us in on what you guys discovered.
Yeah, so Timba's been around since 2012, and in 2014 the source code for it was leaked. And what we saw shortly after that was there was a new version developed adding new features like a domain generation algorithm and RSA signature verification. And so we've been tracking those variants of Timba for over a year now. And it's been interesting seeing the largest infected population in Russia. And what sets that apart is traditionally most of these large banking Trojans have targeted the U.S. and Western Europe because the chances of a Russian cybercriminal being caught and prosecuted for those attacks is pretty minimal. And if you look historically at other banking Trojans that have targeted Russian citizens, Russian law enforcement has pursued legal action against those individuals. And one example of that would be with the Cardburp Trojan in 2013 that led to the arrest of several Ukrainians and Russians because they were targeting Russian and Ukrainian banks.
I know I'm kind of going back to Dridex for a moment. Over the past few months on the podcast, there's been a lot of people that have come on and have talked about the use of attachments, in social engineering and these phishing attacks. And that's what stood out to me when I was reading your post about this botnet and this Trojan, is that it said that it was delivered, through malicious attachments and with Microsoft Office macros in particular. And that's just something I've heard from a variety of people that we've interviewed, that's kind of coming back as a new way to infect people. Just wondering if you have any thoughts on why that's becoming so popular again after it was kind of went out of style for a bit.
Yeah, so I think it, is kind of a case of, what's old is new. And what you saw is about 10, 15 years ago, word macros for spreading malware was quite common. In fact, Microsoft implemented the controls for not automatically running Office macros. And I think a lot of people who are now being infected through these Office macros are probably not familiar with the dangers that an Office macro can pose, and they probably don't realize Office macros can execute code on their system, and that can be used to download and execute malware programs like what we're seeing with Dridex. So I think user education is really kind of the key to why we're seeing the attackers use these methods. And there's probably, a number of people who are not familiar with Office macros and their functionality and the risk they pose.
And then my final question, just wondering, looking forward, obviously the way that cyber criminals attack the financial sector and banks is always sort of changing, but just wondering if there's any trends or anything that sticks out that you think people should be aware of in terms of trying to protect themselves?
So we're seeing a number of different banking Trojans that are coming up with new and innovative techniques to bypass new security measures implemented by banks. What's common nowadays is most banks, they require two-factor authentication for conducting a wire transfer. So the criminals have to somehow evade and bypass those measures. And they do it using another number of different techniques. And one of those is through these banking Trojans, and they use kind of a combination of social engineering with their malware, so they can do a full man-in-the-middle attack against the victim, and they can have that victim provide them with the information, the additional information like an RSA token or a SMS code that they need to conduct one of those fraudulent ACH or wire transfers. And the other way that we see this quite common is they'll tell the user that they need to install some mobile application on their phone in order to provide better security. Usually they say it's some type of certificate, and they will send a link to a malicious Android application that will hijack those SMS messages so they can provide that information if the bank uses mobile TAN codes.
Well, thanks for taking the time. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And that'll do it for this week's episode. A big thanks to Dr. Brett Stone-Gross, Senior Security Researcher at Dell SecureWorks, for stopping by and filling us in on what's going on with some of the financial Trojans. As always, the Cybercrime and Business podcast is brought to you by Surfwatch Labs. Surfwatch Labs delivers cyber risk intelligence solutions that help organizations understand the potential for cyber attacks, determine the impact to their business, and proactively address threats head-on. If you enjoy this podcast, you can find us on iTunes, YouTube, and all the major podcasting sites. And for more information on cyber threat intelligence and how it can help your organization stay safe, check out surfwatchlabs.com.